إلندري قوسا وإحنا معال زاب كوينو موافرنا دحرقهم حيل استوار يبلنا.
Point of no return. There are none for the moment that are capable of upsetting the international public opinion into indignation and bringing immediate humanitarian intervention in Tigray. Unlike the well-known drought and war in Tigray in 1984, there are no photos capable of describing what is exactly happening in Tigray, where a war has been going on for 11 months that sees, on the one hand, the loyalist forces of Addis Ababa supported by the Eritrean and the Amhara militias and special forces, and on the other hand, the TDF, Tigray Defense Force. Why? Because Tigray is under siege and no one can have access to it. The press cannot enter, international observers cannot enter, and above all, even convoys carrying humanitarian aid cannot enter. It is this last factor that indicates the new phase in which the Ethiopian conflict has precipitated. No longer just bombing with drones and aviation, clashes on bows and reprisals against civilians. Now, as a weapon to overturn the fate of the war, we have come to the use of what is the most ferocious and feral weapon there is, namely hunger. To prevent the supply of food and aid, to cause a famine that would bring civilians and militaries to their knees, to wear out, to break every last scrap of perseverance and strength, and then to strike and seek victory by penetrating the heart of an exhausted Tigray. This is the latest strategy adopted by the government of the Peace Nobel Prize winner Abiy Ahmed. Many have denounced it in the last hours, not only operators of humanitarian organizations who, thanks to the local sources, report the hellish situation, but also doctors and senior prelates of the Orthodox clergy. Abne Tesfa Selasie Medhin, Bishop of the Catholic Eparchy of Adigrat, for example, in an open letter, denounced the fact that since June, the roads leading to Tigray have all been closed, and that the population has to cope with the lack of medicines, food, drinking water, and the church, like the humanitarian associations present in the area, despite the efforts and attempts to bring aid, finds it difficult to respond to the humanitarian emergency and the famine that is occurring and which risks causing millions of deaths. An appeal for immediate intervention also came from Hayelom Kebbede, director of the Ida Referral Hospital, who told the press about patients hospitalized in an advanced state of malnutrition. Entire families reduced to eating grass because they lack any other form of nourishment, and mothers with children who lose their lives every day, in the wards of the hospital, because of the serious state of health in which they found themselves. The United Nations talks about the worst famine that the contemporary world has known in recent decades, and the estimates are of 6 million people in desperate need of immediate aid. It all began in November 2020, when Abiy Ahmed troops, with the support of Eritrean forces, Amhara militias, attacked Tigray, where elections were held unauthorized by the central government and which had seen the TPLF win big. Nobel laureate Abiy Ahmed, the political leader celebrated for signing a historic peace with Eritrea, has given the green light to a large-scale offensive to subdue Tigray. But after an initial success by Abiy Ahmed and allying forces, the TDF went on the counter-offensive, recaptured the city of Berhe. Now, the conflict is extended to other regions of Ethiopia, so much so that the fighting reached a few hundred kilometers from the capital, Addis Ababa. Ethnic cleansing, torture, summary executions, bodies carried out by the currents of the rivers in the Sudan, massacres of civilians, and war rapes. This is what's happening in Tigray. in the blindness and silence of the international media. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, spoke of the multiple and serious violations of human rights committed by all parties to the conflict in Tigray. And also the United Nations Secretary Antonio Guterres has expressed himself warning about the risk of tragedy of unspeakable proportions and inviting the parties involved to stop hostilities. Their appeals went unheard, and even President John Biden's threats to impose sanctions on Ethiopia do not seem to have succeeded in the objective of making Abiy Ahmed desist from continuing the war and blocking all access to the besieged Tigray. On Friday, September 17, Biden signed an executive order threatening new sanctions aimed at stemming the escalation of the war and, above all, allowing humanitarian aid to flow into Tigray. The sanctions have not yet been applied in the hope that the threats will be able to change the course of events, but according to the reaction of Abiy Ahmed, it seems that their purpose is far from being achieved. The answer arrived from the office of Abiy Ahmed, and it's reported by many newspapers. In fact, it says, American politics is not only a surprise for our proud nation, but evidently overcomes humanitarian concerns. And continuing by saying of not succumb to the consequences of pressure designed by discontented individuals, so on and so forth. The war, therefore, seems unstoppable. The time for diplomatic negotiations seems to be over. And if there is no turnaround extremely quickly, what will happen in Tigray will be the story of an announced catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. At that point, even the image will be late.